Hey guys, welcome to the Gunpoint. This is Brian here today, and I've got with me Dave Dolbee from over at KVAR. Dave is a phenomenal author. You'll see a little bit more from Dave in some of the future podcasts that we do, talking about some of the great articles that he's written. But want to make sure that we're all here together today, talking about one of the most important things that I think that faces us as a country is a violation of some of our civil rights, and those civil rights are key for every gun owner that's out there. Dave, have you heard about some of these red flag laws?
Yeah, well, they're all over the nation. I mean, anybody who owns a gun or watches the news should have heard of them, and should be. If we're all gun owners, we should be concerned about what's going on. As I see it, it's a straight violation of our rights. There's no due process with most of them. Well, and after the confiscation comes before the due process instead of the other way around.
After the shootings that we had, and again, those shootings that happened over the weekend, a couple weekends ago, were a tragedy. And I'm not taking anything away from those things. I want to make sure that everybody's clear. Those are tragedies. It's unfortunate that they happened. But the red flag laws that they're proposing wouldn't have affected those. Would have zero impact on that. And what was really disappointing is some of our biggest advocates. I mean, we had, and I'm not going to name names on this podcast, but we had Republican congressmen, we had Republican senators, we even had some mumblings from amongst the president that they were looking and considering putting in place something like these red flag laws. Now, another name for these red flag laws is called an extreme risk protection order, and that's that's kind of the two names that they have.
Right.
Before 2018, so by the end of 2018, 13 states had adopted some version of a red flag law. And then since then, I think we've got quite a few more. I know that Nevada has recently adopted some red flag laws that go into effect, I think, the beginning of next year. So we're really looking across the country, more and more of these things coming in place.
That in itself makes no sense. If this is such a critical thing that we have to have this law, this onerous law, this draconian law that tramples on the Second Amendment rights of people, but we can wait until next year to enact it. It's not like something we have to do today. I mean, by analogy, it makes about as much sense as saying, a bunch of people were killed by drunk drivers last year, so the tow trucks can just go through the parking lot of any bar and tow all the cars to keep them from trying to, from potentially, because they've done nothing wrong, they've broken no laws. It's just someone said, that person, I think, is going to be an issue.
Yeah, so let's just make sure that everybody understands what a red flag law is. So the basic idea is that if there's an individual who poses a danger to themselves or others, the premise is that the danger that they pose to themselves and others is magnified by the presence of a firearm. And so because of that, we want to eliminate the potential threat to themselves and others that they create or possess potentially, which frankly everyone possesses a potential for something.
Everybody
right?
has, yeah.
But any potential that they face, they want to eliminate that threat by taking the firearms out of their presence. And this is something that is absolutely going to be a problem. I mean, imagine this. Imagine that you've got an ex-wife, an ex-girlfriend. You've got a neighbor that you had a dispute with, and this is an issue on one of these things. So you've got a neighbor that you've just had a dispute with. Your branches were over their side of the fence. They got upset with you. The two of you had an argument. That neighbor has seen you go to the range multiple times. They now feel threatened because you had a dispute with them over the branches being over your property line. They're afraid you're going to retaliate, and they go ahead and they call in and say, hey, look, I think this guy's a threat to me, to my family, because he has firearms. Judge signs off on an order. Boom.
I'll give you an even scarier one. What about someone who, again, domestic dispute, husband and wife, whether the husband's the aggressor or the wife's the aggressor, calls in and accuses the other one. Police come in, take their firearms. They now know that they've got a defenseless victim for a suicide, murder-suicide scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. They've created somebody that they know is defenseless. One of the things that I was surprised about with some of these red flag laws was an article. When I started doing some research on this, I found out that my friends, and I say that with tongue in cheek, but the ACLU, that's right, the American Civil Liberties Union of Rhode Island, has come out with what's called an analysis of, and this is an analysis of the Rhode Island version of these red flag laws, and come out and said, while the ACLU of Rhode Island recognizes the bill's laudable goals, We are deeply concerned about its breadth, its impact on civil liberties, and the precedent it sets for the use of coercive means against individuals, not because they are alleged to have committed any crime, but because somebody believes they might someday commit one. This is the ACLU.
Yeah, every once in a while they do get it right. They do seem to come to the defense of our rights instead of always feel so many times that they trample upon them, but they really do. They go down for the little guy sometimes, and in this case, the Second Amendment and the people who believe in the Second Amendment are really the little guy. We're getting more and more against us.
Yeah. Well, and what I like about it is they recognize that the Second Amendment is a right. I mean, there's a lot of people who are taking it now and saying the Second Amendment is more of a suggestion. It's not a right. That it's becoming kind of an issue. One of the things that the ACLU does is they come up with some points on this deal. One of the things they say is that a court order authorized by this legislation could be issued without any indication that the person poses an imminent threat to others. I mean, so that's one of the problems that the ACLU finds with these red flag laws is, hey, a court can issue these orders without even a true indication. Just testimony of some potentially biased individual could create an issue where there's no really imminent threat.
And you'd be the lawyer, so you'd be better able to describe this. But basically, when someone else says someone else said something with no proof, I mean, isn't that
hearsay?
That's hearsay, right? I'm not the lawyer here. I can't give you all the legal definitions, but yeah, that's hearsay. That wouldn't even be admissible in a court unless you brought the original person in, who was there and actually heard. But that's not what the court's getting. The court's getting a secondhand statement from somebody through law enforcement, getting an order and taking away something without due process.
Well, and one of the next thing that they put in their check marks on the bullet points of what they had here was it says the order could be issued without any evidence that the person ever committed or has even threatened to commit an act of violence with a firearm. Again, So
what's the purpose? Why? I mean, that's just, hey, I don't want you to have a firearm. So there's absolutely no reason to. You're not even a public threat. There's no danger.
One of the things that me as a lawyer, I have to, clients come in, they say, okay, I want to file a lawsuit. First question I ask is, okay, what evidence do you have? I mean, I can't put my name down on and sign my signature and file something with the court if it's not made in good faith, right?
What other warrant can police get that they have absolutely no evidence of a crime, no evidence of danger, no evidence of anything, and just go out and get a warrant to come into your home and search it or to violate your rights in some other way?
In another article that I pulled up as a part of this, it gave some of the percentages on how often people were able to get their firearms back in those states where the firearms were confiscated, and it was as low as 70% of those firearms never returned. Can you imagine?
Yeah, but some of them, which is kind of amazing too, the people merely showed up in court. And the weapons were returned. So again, what have we stopped? What have we done? The person shows up. The judge says you're sane. Is that what it is? What was the recourse there for whoever reported them if it was that easy to get the weapon returned?
Well, and when are we going to make a judge become the decider on whether somebody's competent or not? When you go to a competency hearing, for example, in court, the judge looks at it and says, okay, we need to determine whether this person is competent to stand trial. The judge doesn't conduct the evaluation. He sends you off to a professional to have you evaluated. And so why are we letting judges, without being able to see the individual, only potentially hearing the testimony of some biased witness, make a decision as to whether somebody is or is not mentally competent, mentally available, or a threat to themselves or others, making these type of determinations?
Well, what's the whole purpose of the red flag law in the first place? Is it the gun that's dangerous or the person that they're worried about operating the gun that's dangerous? If it's the person that they're worried about operating it, why doesn't the order say to take this person into custody and get them an evaluation? Because as soon as you leave them on the street, they may have access to a gun that the police didn't get. They may go out and access another gun. They may take a truck and run it through a crowd of people, as we've seen terrorists do. Why aren't they focused on the individual? Why are they focused with these red flag laws on the firearm as the only instrument that a mentally ill person, a dangerous person could use to commit one of these heinous acts?
Well, again, so they're going to go take all the steak knives out of the drawer, right? I mean, how far is this going to go?
Just a big stabbing case the other day where someone, yep. I think he killed possibly a couple of kids or something like that. I heard about before the police got there, and it's happened. There was the case in Japan here 3 weeks or a month ago where the guy was upset and set the place on fire and a bunch of people died. I mean, it's the individual. It's the mentally ill individual. So if we're going to have these red flag laws or something similar to it, then they need to take that person into some sort of a custody, because the potential for evil, the potential for danger, the potential to do damage is still out there. Simply removing the firearms, it's removed one element, but it's far from actually removing the threat.
Well, and the threat in this, I agree with you, is the individual. What we're fighting here is a mental health crisis. I mean, you think about it, we don't have any place where those people who are mentally impaired are able to really receive the treatment that they need, or to, if necessary, have the housing and the facilities to house them and keep them apart from what we'll call general population in some level, right?
Right.
To give them the treatment that they need. To give them and the other side of it is we have a major drug epidemic, prescription or otherwise, that create mind-altering effects. And so with the fact that we've got a drugged population, we've got a mentally deficient individuals that are able to be out there on the streets because there's no other place for them, we've created a big problem. And so we're trying to fix it by, and I think we're cutting at the limbs instead of the roots of the problem.
Oh, definitely. That's a good point. Yeah, like I say, they're going after a symptom. You know, when you have somebody who's ill, the doctor doesn't try and treat the symptom, they try and treat the malady. What we're doing right now is they're trying to treat a symptom. They're trying to make the gun the evil part, the symptom. And if you can just remove that one evil part, you'll remove the potential acts of the person. And that's just not the case. It's been proven time and again.
And it's been established, I think it's well established, that there's no evidence that red flag laws are actually going to do anything for this. In fact,
the proof is the red flags will do something. It will trample on our Second Amendment rights without due process. I think that's pretty clear. They've proven that.
But it's not going to do anything to stop. What they're trying to do is to stop these types of mass shootings, right? To stop individuals from utilizing firearms and type of violent acts. And there's no evidence that it does that. In fact, the New York Times recently reported, said the evidence for whether extreme risk protection orders work to prevent gun violence is inconclusive, according to a study by the Rand Corporation on the effectiveness of gun safety measures.
There'll always be one or two cases out there. I heard of one the other day where I think it was a grandmother turned in her grandson, and he had went out and bought, an AK or something, and he had a list, and they actually ended up they had tried to stop it, and then I think a week later or something, they actually arrested the guy in a hotel room with a letter, apologizing or whatever, and saying he was, he wanted to be taken out suicide by cop at the end of it. You can get these one-offs, but that doesn't mean because you can find a one-off here or a one-off there that to stop all drunk driving, we can stop everyone from being able to drive a car.
Well, whether we have a red flag law or not doesn't stop grandma from calling up the police and saying, I think my grandson is a threat, come conduct an investigation, and allowing the police to come in there, conduct the investigation. She's got a tip. They've got something that they could start an investigation into. Due process can take its course, and there could probably be something that would be able to be effectuated by that. You don't need a red flag law that gives police an opportunity to come in and seize the firearm first and then prove guilt or innocence later.
Exactly. And at that point where you're that worried about the person, the police or whatever other assets they need to bring in can go ahead and make that mental health assessment that's so critical. Because, again, just taking away the firearm is a partial solution at best if this person was actually dedicated to doing some kind of a heinous act.
Yeah. Well, and one of the other points that was brought up, and I've talked to a couple different people, they said that red flag laws could lead to more violence. And, of course, everybody cites to the Maryland police officer case in 2018, where some police officers went in to a 61-year-old individual to seize his guns. And then there was a struggle over whether he didn't want to give up his Second Amendment rights, he didn't want to give up his guns, struggle over the firearm, and the police shoot the guy. I mean, so is this creating a situation where you're going to create a confrontation between individuals and police that doesn't have to be? There's nothing, no evidence that guy was going to go out and do anything or shoot anybody else, and yet he lost his life because somebody said that he potentially posed a threat, and the police went in there to confiscate it and created a confrontation that wasn't necessary.
It's ludicrous. And what's the penalty for these people? I mean, people say, hey, you told me to report it. I thought this. I mean, I didn't have any actual proof, but, that's the way it seemed to me, or that was the way a conversation that I took it. You know, we don't want people not to report stuff, just like with terrorism or anything. We don't want people to not report and then after the fact say, oh gosh, yeah, I saw that. I wish I would have said something. No, we definitely want those people coming forward, but we want the due process to precede the confiscation. We want there to be a justifiable, we want competent authority to come in and have judged this a danger. And at that point, you can't just take the firearm. You have to take the person because the person is the danger. And I think that that's a message that we don't get out there enough. The person is the potential danger, not the firearm.
And I go back to the fact that this is all pre-crime, right? This is before anything's happened. This
Minority Report.
That's what I was going to say.
Minority Report.
We were just talking about movies a little bit ago, and there's one right there that has been almost prophetic in some levels.
Oh, definitely.
In the way the government's trying to operate now is to say, we're going to identify those individuals we think that are going to be potentially committing a crime. And so before they do that, we're going to stop them by taking away their rights.
Yeah, I mean, to a point, I can say that, I believe that their heart is in the right place. We all want to be proactive. We all want to do anything we can to stop these heinous acts, to stop mass murder. I mean, it could be any of us. It could be any of our children, our loved ones, anything. We're all dedicated to that. I say that most of us have the problem with the process that they've chosen to do by trying to vilify the gun instead of trying to get the person, the individual, the help that they need, or off the street if they're someone who's unreachable for some time. Yeah. They've got to go forward with that before they can just say we're going to go in, because then what comes next? Maybe you don't care about guns. Maybe guns aren't your thing. Maybe you think that guns are the problem. But what happens when they go in next and they say, oh, those cars, look at all the people, the medications or something, let's just go in and go through everybody's medicine cabinet. Let's just take everything out because anything could be a danger. Somebody could use it to commit suicide. A kid could accidentally get it. We can vilify anything and make it the object if we want to.
Well, and I won't talk about, these certain orders that were going on during a historical point in I guess there's a point in history. I say historical point, but a point in history where they only wanted you to read certain literature. So we had big book burnings in a certain country where they decided that those books were going to create problems, they were going to create issues, and so they decided certain books were not allowed to be read and they had to be burned or destroyed, and so the government could go in and get those because those books were leading people to do certain things that were inconsistent with the way that the police state wanted them to operate.
And it like you say, it leads you down that slippery slope. What happens when they want to tackle another amendment? What happens when all of a sudden they want to limit certain types of speech? I think that those conservatives, I think those liberals are really bad. And depending on which president, which House was in power, they just passed laws that, we're just going to restrict that freedom of speech. We're going to equate it the same as yelling fire in a theater. Once we go down this path, the parallel reasoning is there to where they can just trample on any right. They just find a way to vilify the right, find a few test cases that they can put out in the news that a few people have done this, and then we're just going to... I saw a good meme that really, really explained this. It had a picture of a wolf, and it says that the sheep see the wolf's teeth, and they realize the danger that the wolf possesses, so the sheep all have their teeth pulled, so there's no more danger from the wolf. That's exactly what they're trying to do here. They're trying to say the law-abiding, those not breaking the law, let's go ahead and trample on their rights. And then for what? For what? What did they accomplish?
Well, and what I think is clear at the end of the day is that if we create laws like this, I mean, this is a significant law that, as you mentioned, creates a significant slippery slope. And they're doing this really out of politics and as an emotional response to things. Every time that there's some tragedy that happens, we get those people who try to exploit the tragedy by pushing forward some type of agenda, right? And my fear is that these red flag laws are that emotional response to somebody's political agenda. And I'm saddened that the people that we've elected, people that we've previously identified as supporters of the Second Amendment, they actually jumped on board with this for a period of time. That's what scared me, is when I looked at it and I saw somebody like, and I don't mean to call him out, but when I saw somebody like Dan Crenshaw send out a tweet and an Instagram post about, hey, look, maybe we ought to consider something like this, I was horrified because I have a lot of respect for him, right. But all of a sudden out of nowhere, we see him say something like this and it's like, whoa, wait a minute here. You've been a supporter. You've been a guy that I've looked to and admired going forward. And as soon as the winds start to change a little bit or things get a little difficult, you decide to lose your position. That's what happens in D.C. We need to make sure that D.C. politicians are in touch with what the real people are. And the real people in America, they support the Second Amendment.
Yeah. With Dan Crenshaw, I think it was a knee-jerk reaction to run to feel-good politics. I think that once he sat down and thought about it, maybe got some feedback from some others. I mean, we can all be emotionally touched in the moment with something, but going to that, that knee-jerk, that feel-good, we're just going to pretend that this will give us some kind of sense of security when we know logically that there's no way it does. It isn't the criminals who are doing the background checks, even these mass shootings that have been done by people. The last few I know have all been legally purchased weapons. Mm-hmm. There's not a law that we would have passed that would have stopped that. Not the background check, not universal background checks, not red flag laws. None of these would have stopped those events. So why are we using those as the backing, the case study that goes ahead and says, yes, let's push forward on this?
I think we've talked about red flag laws. We've talked about our opinions on it, but what I want to hear is what does everybody else feel about it? And so at the end of the day, you guys know where we stand. We have serious concerns. Do you have those same concerns, guys? If you do, let us hear about them. Let us know about them. And then the key for this is let your elected officials know about what your concerns are. Because what we say here, what we talk about here, that's between us and the listeners. But where you can have an impact is who you put into office. You need to be proactive in your community. You need to be proactive in your state. You need to be proactive in the nation, electing officials who are going to care about preserving your rights. They may not like their Second Amendment, but they've got to acknowledge it's one of your rights that needs to be protected. And they can do that. And I'm not picking on one party or the other. I'm saying it's a protection of rights. When we can sit here together with the ACLU and agree that this is something that needs to be a concern for each of us, it should be. And you need to find those officials that will support you and your rights, not these red flag laws. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dave, for being here today. Appreciate you, bud.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks. All right, we'll see you guys next time at the Gunpoint.